with the thing, or did you guys, I saw that you had on the schedule that you wanted to do, what was it?
Yeah, it's good to have a quick round robin, just to get a sense of who everybody is on the call. So I'll start. Hi, Craig Tomler, currently co-founder of simplemarketing.ai. I've got that background up so you don't see all the stuff behind me. Currently we have a GPT-3 product in the market. So I think we're the first company in Australia to bring one to market. We're very big advocates for the tool and its applications, and are finding it really good to work with. Tony, do you want to go next? You're next on my list.
Yeah, sure. So Tony Davis, it's probably general interest for me. Work-wise, I'm on the sales team for a company called DS. We're a technology consultancy, Australian-based, probably about 120 or so consultants across engineering and design and delivery. And I'm, sort of particularly interested in working with we have a machine learning practice within there. Probably our core strength there is within computer vision. And we've got sort of a number of projects within that area, but sort of natural language is also a key area of interest. So that's why I've sort of spotted this group and trying to make a few of the meetups. Sydney based as well, so I'm in Sydney.
Elijah, you need to unmute yourself if you're there. Hello, Elijah. I might skip over you to, I might get your name wrong, sorry, Bax.
Yeah, hey guys, just excited to tune in. I run a YouTube channel on GPT-3 and a newsletter podcast, and Bram and I have had a few events now, so I'm here honestly just to support and learn from him. I'm excited to just follow along. So yeah, excited for today's event.
Great. There's still an opportunity for you, Elijah, if you want to introduce yourself. If not, Bram, I'll let you take it over, give your own introduction, and then we can get started.
Great. Yeah, I'll put the introduction is included in the slideshow itself. So if y'all don't mind, I guess I'll just kind of hop into that and then we can do that. The question is, oh, okay, it's just on the other tab. Hold on. I have to switch tabs on my Chrome to present mode. Okay, here we go. Can you all see my screen?
All good.
Yeah, great. So I had a number of thoughts about the way that I kind of wanted to take this talk. I thought like I could make it more GPT-3 focused, a little bit more kind of like about the technology. But then I started to think about kind of my relationship with GPT-3 and how it's evolved over time. And I think a more interesting kind of subject matter is the kind of thoughts that allow me to have made so many different products and process, like in projects within the GPT-3 space. And I really think that mindset, especially when we're talking about artificial intelligence, is kind of key. So the topic of this talk is called the artist practitioner and the computer. So let's jump into it. So hello, I'm Bram Adams, creative technologist. Creative technologist is, again, it's more of a tactical definition, more so than like a day-to-day kind of task. Basically, what I do day to day is that I use different technologies to make things happen. I very much sit in the prototypal space a lot. I'm very fascinated by the idea of, art is also a very kind of like broad term, but more along the lines of creating something new out of thought space and bringing it into the real world by using the technologies and tools available to you. And that's kind of a spoiler for kind of like how this talk is going to be led. I work with clients right now. So right now I run an agency called Sharing Fiction, but I also recently just got a OpenAI app approved for production called Stenography. And we've kind of been stealth mode about that, my co-founder and I, but we're starting to get a bit more public about it. We've been playing around with it, but the long and short of the tool is that it basically can explain the same code to different audiences. So let's say that you're, not necessarily a technical minded person, and you might be want like an explanation that's more high level for a block of code versus somebody who's a developer and is interested in like the variables and the sub functions within the code and stuff like that. So we're building an API that can kind of handle those types of queries and slotting it into Visual Studio Code and CI/CD tools for like GitHub and stuff like that as well. So you can find out more about that at stenography.dev if you're interested in signing up for that mailing list and kind of keeping an eye on where that goes. So today, what we're going to be learning and discussing, and my thing is in the way, this Zoom call thing, but I can't move it, whatever, it's kind of blocking the right half of the screen. So what we'll be learning is, first, we're going to be meeting the artist. We're going to be talking about what does it mean to be an artist. Then we're going to talk about the practitioner and what does it mean to be a practitioner. And then we're going to connect these two parts of the that might be seen as more distinct by using the tools that are available to us, in our case, computers. So let's talk about the artist first. The artist, to me, is the unadulterated pursuit of curiosity. I think that really sums up the artist for me. The quintessential artist, actually kind of, I would argue, creative technologist in general, is Leonardo Da Vinci. He had a lot of ideas that were really crazy and out there. But then he was also really able to execute at a level of mastery that a lot of other people in his time just weren't able to summon. So, I've read a number of kind of like books about Leonardo da Vinci. I don't know if you've noticed, but the picture that's I use for Twitter and Instagram and kind of my social media picture is actually one of his sketches called The Head of Leda. So this is from Walter Isaacson's Leonardo da Vinci book, which is getting, again, blocked by this thing. So I'm going to move it down here, I guess. Leonardo had honed two other traits that aided his scientific pursuits: an omnivorous curiosity, which bordered on the fanatical, and then an acute power of observation, which was eerily intense. The first one was meant to make you curious about, oh, what's the second one? And it's observation. So curiosity and observation kind of work together in tandem to create something that's greater than the parts. So who is the artist? To me, the artist is driven purely by impulse and curiosity, always hungry for knowledge, but never really finds conclusion, right? So you can be conclusive with your projects, but the goal of the artist is to always be asking the next question and finding the next thing to kind of like dive their teeth into. There is no real finish line because knowledge isn't one of these things that can be epistemologically solved, right? There's always more to know because every answer opens up two more questions, right? So the artist is very non-judgmental and comfortable with being wrong, just merely as a form of self-expression and curiosity. So up here, I have a few images, and I guess like the little game that I was trying to play mentally is like saying like what are the similarities between like this image, and this image, and like two of them are paintings, maybe one thing people might say, and one of them is this person who's being super pious and is in middle of prayer. Another is a dance class filled with students, and the last is the transistor being discovered. To me, I think the three things that really connect these are people just being curious and doing what they like, for lack of a better term. There's a lot of different things to pursue in this world. Some people are into culinary arts, some people are into learning languages, some people are into computers, other people are into dancing. There's no real wrong answer for an artist. The important thing is that you just chase the thing that you're really curious about. But that kind of leaves you in a predicament, because or not a predicament, it leaves you in a position, okay, I have this curiosity, I'm driven by something, but what do I do with it? Okay, actually, I do have another slide after this, sorry. So there are no wrong answers, which I was just saying about the idea of being a cook or a dancer or whatever suits you. I think the only one wrong answer is to pursue nothing at all. And corollary to pursue something because somebody else told you to do it. So curiosity is one of those things that you should just kind of know in your heart to be true and doesn't really need verification because it's already kind of driven amorphously. I think like what I found with curiosity is that it kind of gets ruined if you dive too deeply into why that you're curious about something. And it's much more fun and satisfying. And I'll show some examples later to just chase it because you were just like, well, I just wanted to know. That was pretty much it. I just wanted to find out. So now we're going to introduce the practitioner, which didn't fit on the slide. So I renamed it just to Doer for this one slide, which is just the discipline to get shit done. Basically, to be able to have an idea and then execute on it is more important than just having an idea. And it's more important than just being a person who can execute things. I would rather be a person who can execute than one who has ideas, but it's much better to have both if you can be both. So great creative minds, think like artists, but work like accountants. This is one of my more favorite books, Deep Work by Newport. Highly recommend. Phenomenal book. Really kind of clarifies the value of deep work in an economy that doesn't really prioritize sitting in one place for a long time and deep diving into a particular problem, and much more rewards people just constantly, like, let's say for example, shit posting on social media and just having like a constant stream of content, which itself is like a deep dive. But in a way, it's like if you read 3,000 tweets versus reading 30 books, at the end of 30 books, you've read 30 books. At the end of 3,000 tweets, you have 3,000 light, just kind of like shallow glimpses into the current state of a thing. You don't have a deep understanding of any one topic. So the practitioner mainly is methodical and disciplined. They set a time to work and they do that work. They're very meticulous. If there's something that they feel needs to get done. To me, meticulous doesn't necessarily mean meticulous to the point of pure mastery of craft. I think it can. It's a situational basis. But for me, it's generally 80-20, right? So it's like I'm meticulous about the details that need to get done. And I'm very not vicious, but I make a point of not doing the things that I don't think will help my projects get to where they need to be. So just in terms of sating my curiosity, I get very clear about what things I need to get done per project that will sate my curiosity. And then I attack all of those with great kind of force. And how do you attack them? What's the battle strategy? Mainly just long stretches of focused work, turning on your favorite music or going to your favorite coffee shop or doing whatever you got to do just to be able to focus on what you have to focus on and just doing it. There's nothing to it but to do it. So these images, again, I kind of wanted to draw some kind of combination as to why I think that they might be interesting. So here we have Einstein walking with, I forget who that other person is, as I was initially looking for the Godel walking with Einstein, but I couldn't find that image. Here's another walking image in a garden. And here's a shack from Henry David Thoreau. And to me, the overlap of these three things is just the idea of really deep diving into a problem and not running away from it. And actually, I have this on this next slide here. So do not run from the work or the struggle. I think this is something that I find a lot with tech. And I find a lot just in general when people take on projects is they run into a barrier and they're like, oh, I can't do it. I can't figure it out, right? Sometimes it is worth switching your strategy, but it's never really just worth giving up for the sake of giving up. And I think that the fun is kind of embedded in the challenge itself. And that deep work requires effort, and the reward is mastery. And mastery comes in a lot of different ways. Like mastery feels good when you hit it because you kind of know when you hit it because it just feels natural. Like it becomes an extension of you. You are able to just function as if the thing that you were trying to solve is as simple as or habitual as tying your shoes or driving a car. Maybe not as simple as breathing, but like something on that next level of being able to do it unconsciously. So then that leaves us in a better spot, right? So when we introduced the artist, we were like saying, okay, now you have your curiosities. We know that everybody is into something or driven by something. We have the practitioner, which is saying, let me take that something and actually make something with it, which leaves us in the spot of like, okay, how do we actually get things done? So this is where the AI machine learning part of this talk comes into play. So I believe that tools just in general give you a lot of raw inputs that allow you to say like, oh, this tool works well for my curiosity, this one doesn't. This one allows me to focus more, this one doesn't, et cetera, et cetera. So the quote from this one, the AI ML, is that the trick to having good ideas is not to sit around in glorious isolation and think big thoughts, it's to get more parts on the table. So in a way that might seem a bit contradictory to the idea of deep work, but I don't believe it is. I think deep work is more of the execution. But when you go into an execution of just saying like, I'm going in completely blind, you're actually going to end up in a worse position than knowing what your options are before you go in. So this is kind of like seeing what your options are for, let's say, 30 minutes for the first 30 minutes of the day, and then spending the next 4 hours working on a hunch or working on a hypothesis. So it's not an excuse to not do either. But I think that if I had to choose between one or the other, I would always lean people towards the idea of execution being way more valuable than ideation, because ideas are born from execution generally, and you don't really know what you're going to see until you execute far enough, until you're like, oh, well, there was an idea embedded in the execution. So let's talk a little bit about GPT-3 and why I think it's caught so much fire over the past year. Is that it's a phenomenal and versatile tool. It's able to do a lot of different things. We always had pretty single-use tools. We've had hammers, we've had wrenches, we've had, light switches for lights, and things tend to do one thing. But after computers came out, we were like, wow, we can create one thing that can be a lot of different things. It can be a video player and a music player, and it can record decks, and it can send bank monies to people, and it can run code on top of itself. So GPT-3 is great because it's a model that allows you to, write poetry, but it also can talk about the weather, and it could also, be a lot of different things. It could read code, what I'm doing for stenography. It's great at summarization. But I think as with any tool, like if you give a hammer to somebody who's never used a hammer before, a tool is really only as good as your vision and execution, right? So the idea of building the mindset of the artist practitioner is so important, because the better mindset that you have and the better position you are to being able to execute on your mindset, the tools will get better around you. You'll become better at using the tools in chorus with your mindset, basically. So it's like giving someone who is a novice a tool and just saying, use it, is pretty ineffective, but it's equally as ineffective to give somebody who considers themselves an expert a bad tool. So you want to find the tools that fit your vision and execution. Don't be afraid to try new technologies to reach your goal, but don't learn a technology because it's hype. This is kind of where I sit with like the kind of crypto space right now. A lot of people are screaming NFTs and safe moons and all this coin stuff. And there are people who are in the space who are genuinely curious about it, but I think a lot of people really aren't, and they're kind of doing it because other people around them are. So really kind of picking and choosing the technologies that will, and tools, excuse me, that will help you get to where you want to be is super important. And I felt like this with GPT-3, even like when I was more bored with GPT-3 at the tail end of last year, I moved back into augmented reality, and I played around with that for a while. And then I came back to GPT-3 when I was re-inspired to take on new tasks with it. So I think don't be afraid to leave a technology because it's hype, or don't be afraid to do something because it's not cool. So use the tools that make sense for the thing that you're trying to solve. Okay, so what does all of this look like in real life? And this is going to be, of course, in my own experience and my own projects that I've built over the past couple of years now. And these are just a select few, but I think these three kind of sum up the ideas really well. So the format is I'm going to be talking about the kind of curiosity that I initially came into the project with, then the tools that I used to solve that problem, and then kind of a few sentences on the result. So this first one here we're going to talk about is Little DJ. Basically, for a few weeks, I was really consumed by the idea of machine vision at like dance clubs, and being able to basically track people's facial expressions to see if the DJ is playing songs that people like, for lack of a better term. And I did create a demo that was allowable to do that. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. And I'm glad that this technology currently exists, because that leaves open a whole bunch of other questions, like how to do this in dark rooms, like what kind of facial expressions mean what kind of thing, you know what I mean? Like how are DJs supposed to use this information, et cetera, et cetera. So for this one though, I was like, okay, how can GPT-3 be a interesting music friend? How can it suggest cool music things to me? So the tools that I used were GPT-3 and the Spotify API. So basically the way that I built this on a really high level is that I fed in GPT-3 a mood, and then I got it to suggest 3 or 4 songs. And then I use those 3 or 4 songs as a seed playlist for Spotify's API, where it can actually use its own artificial intelligence to find songs that are similar. So the idea would be like you say, okay, I'm going to an expensive bar, or, I'm riding down the street on my scooter, or I'm going to go get a burrito or something like that. And it'll still select songs that it thinks are fit that vibe, quote unquote. And then the Spotify API will do the rest. So this was a fun project. Taught me a lot about kind of how the Spotify API worked. Again, kind of like connecting different tools. In this case was the Spotify and GPT-3. So this next project actually has nothing to do with GPT-3, but it was definitely one of my more fun projects because it was my first augmented reality project. I'd always been kind of interested by AR, and I'd created a few filters on Instagram, but I hadn't really coded anything with Swift that could like do image tracking or object tracking. And I think that the space has so much more to be discovered. And I come up with ideas pretty much every other day that I can't really execute on because I have more pressing tasks that need my attention. But I'm very excited to continue to deep dive into this space because there's a lot there. But basically, so my curiosity here was that we all have these vinyls from artists, but we don't have record players anymore. Like record players are really outdated. We all just have these really nice speakers that don't work with record players. And what is the future of all these beautiful album artworks that are basically sitting on these huge records? So I used the image tracking iOS library and AR kit and my new iPhone, which I had gotten at the time, to basically take one of my favorite artists, Childish Gambino, and play one of his more popular music videos when my phone tracked against the vinyl cover. So again, it was just an idea of, I have this thing sitting in my room and I think it's cool. It'd be cooler if it could play a music video or it had like some kind of modern, up-to-date kind of like functionality. And funnily enough, I don't think they actually saw my video, which actually did get pretty popular on Reddit, but like somebody turned it into like a business. So now there's like a business out there where you can scan your vinyl records and then they'll have an artist draw something that's like a cool GIF of like basically of that vinyl record. And then you can like take that app and then like put it on against all your vinyls and see them come to life, which is, really cool. And I'm glad that that technology exists. So then this one was one of my more popular projects. Again, purely driven just by my own curiosities. I think that, we are going to eventually get to a future where it makes sense to kind of part and parcel out parts of our personality and turn them a little bit more into AI components. Specifically, since we think that there's a lot of things that are unique about us, but aren't really, we all have our favorite teams and we all have our favorite foods and other things like that, things that can fit onto a dating profile. So what I was curious about here was like, what does ML mean for the future of what we think of ourselves, especially with the technology that allows us to scan ourselves and all of this stuff. So basically, I was able to combine a lot of the tools that I had been using for my other projects over the course of this year to build this self AR interview podcast where I interviewed my robot self. So I used GPT-3 to run the logic, the brain behind it of parsing out what I was questioning and responding back with an answer. I used ARKit to, as we just discussed in the last slide, to put an object in 3D space. I used In3D to scan myself, which was a free app. And then I used Blender to rig it up. And then I used a few other things like speech recognition kit to turn text into speech so that I gave it a voice as well. And all these tools are free. You know what I mean? Like that's what I think too, is that there's a lot of flexibility these days with tools if you're willing to be kind of scrappy, for lack of a better term. So in conclusion, the artist practitioner is a person who embraces their own curiosity, but then channels that curiosity through deep work mastery in the sense of being willing to spend hours locked away working on the thing that they need to work on, and being resourceful with the tools that they use, right? So I think GPT-3 is a very resourceful tool, but it's not the only tool. So it's important that the sum is more powerful than its components, and that all these things kind of work together to create what I think are some really cool outputs. So thank you. That's the talk.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Bram. That was sort of a good, I suppose, helicopter scan across, that work and how you go about it. Before I open up for questions, which I'll do in just a sec, I just wanted to ask you, with your use of GP3 and how that's evolved over time, what are some of the key insights you've had into both using the tool itself and into sort of how it's likely to change the role that you've described, both in terms of the ideation and the execution side?
I think the tool itself, the main value and detriment of it is its flexibility. And, as a developer ambassador, I do a lot of office hours, and I think a lot of people come into my office hours because they want it to be a specific thing that it's not. But a lot of the time, the better question is, are you asking the right question? Or are you searching for the right kind of, GPT-3 is interesting because it's one of the first kind of introspective tools that I've seen. And the idea that with some other tools, it's really easy to just say like, okay, I'm going to apply this solve, and then it's going to fix my problem for me. But with GPT-3, you actually go a lot farther, and tools like it, when you deeply understand the thing that you're trying to solve in the first place. So the more familiar you are with the problem that you're solving, the better outcomes you'll get.
Okay. And I guess my other question, you've obviously got this upcoming release coming. Can you talk a little bit about what you're bringing to market and how people might be able to use it?
Yeah, so I think that, again, I've been playing with GPT-3 for a little over a year now, and it feels like, or I guess we're coming up on a year. It was July 2020 or whenever it came out. I don't really know off the top of my head. And I hadn't really found something that I felt that I could build out well enough to kind of be a product that I could stand behind, that was going to be useful to the general person, but also be something that I was really genuinely curious about building, right? So again, this idea of being able to know that, oh, I am curious about this problem deep enough to be able to work on it for a number of years, right? And I will be able to put in the deep work to make that happen because I know that I'm confident in my ability to make that happen. So once you kind of stumble on an idea like that, it's really nice to run with it. So in particular, stenography is used to decipher code, explain it to different audiences. So what does that mean? Again, like the idea is that when you first read a code base, let's say that you're first joining a new company, or let's say that you're a non-technical person who hired a technical person to do something at your company, or let's say that you're a technical person who just joined a new company and you're reading code for, their code for the first time, or you haven't reread the code that you wrote in a long time. So what stenography allows you to do is it basically takes that code and explains it in ways that different people will understand, right? So it's kind of like a Babelfish, and the idea that it speaks a lot of different lingos and summarizes code really well and accurately, right? So it's really good at summarizing the ideas and the semantics behind the why of coding, which is always the most interesting part, because sure, like you can make a program that reads back to you, this is a for loop and that does this, this method is named this does that, right? But the idea is that when people are reading code, they want to understand the meaning behind the code. Like, why is this calling this API? What is this API doing for us? Why is it, what does this tie back in to the overall kind of picture? So the way that we're bringing that to market is I'm building a Visual Studio Code plugin. And then I'm also, we have built like a web app and stuff like that for the even like less technical people who wouldn't have Visual Studio Code installed on their computer. But the root of it is just like this really, this API, similar to the OpenAI API, which will allow you to basically pass in a code block, choose your audience of choice, choose how complex you want it to be, give it some context, and then it gets sent off and gets basically parsed into the type of response that you're looking for.
Cool. Now, I'd like to open the floor to other questions. If anybody has one, feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, sure. Look, I'll jump in there. Just on that, hey, Bram, that was a good presentation. Yeah, kind of all the way through. I really like your definitions there of the artist and the practitioner and bringing those two things together. But just on that last piece there, the stenography one. So, look, I'm not a coder, but you know, I would consider myself to be a technologist of sorts, probably more from the commercial side. I certainly, you know, it's kind of what I sell. So being able to sort of understand it and sort of talk about it is important. But the stenography thing, like, does that in a way potentially replace documentation?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. And this is one of the reasons that I actually made it in the first place. So as you could see throughout the projects that I was showing here, a lot of my projects are code based, right? But then I would always find myself in the situation where I have to describe either people are interested in how they're made, or they're interested in why it exists in the first place, right? So, but sometimes the part of the brain that's good at writing code isn't the good of the part of the brain that explains it. And I know that sounds like a little bit like separate, but it's kind of like the idea of how you you process visual cues with one part of your brain and you process audio cues with another, right? Or you speak with the, what is it, the Broca's area, right? Or listen with the Broca's area. I always forget which is which, but like the different parts of your brain do different things is what it comes down to. So I think in terms of documentation, you know, there was two main values that I saw with stenography. So again, I was a developer advocate in a past life. And I spent most of my job explaining code to people and trying to make sure that the documentation was up to date, especially as it evolved, right? So having self-aware, quote unquote, code is insanely valuable for documentation, right? Because it will always know what the latest version of the code looks like, right? It will be aware of what the value of a function is as it evolves over time and as it changes, right? So the idea is that code is this moving target that kind of becomes hard to explain because you would come back to your code, like usually documentation is done after the fact, right? So you'll write your code, you'll run your code, you'll be like, okay, it works. I'm gonna go take a nap or something. And then you like come back the next day and you're like, oh, I need to write documentation for this. Who is my audience? What am I trying to say? People who are good coders aren't really always good at documentation and vice versa, right? So having something that is and I don't really necessarily want to say it's a full replacement, but it's something as a partner and something that is really good at drafting and getting you that first really good seed idea of saying, this code does this, and these are the variables, and these are the values, gives a really great jumping off point for people to come in and say, okay, let's have a conversation about this. This isn't the type of function that I thought this code would be doing, or this might throw this kind of error, or, you know what I mean? There's a lot of different sub conversations that need to happen, but can only really happen once everybody has the exact same level of understanding of the code base that they're looking at. And sometimes that's almost an impossible ask, because it was, you know, if you're familiar with the bus load principle, you know, there's the idea that you have one very good engineer on your team who has all of the knowledge of your product locked away in their brain, and that if they got hit by a bus, then you'd kind of be SOL, right? Because you're like, we can't change their code, like we don't know what they did. So we just have to leave it the way it is, I guess. So stenography hopefully addresses that problem as well.
Yeah, right. That's kind of very interesting. I do hear, you know, our guys sort of talk about that sort of thing, you know, like sort of good code versus bad code. And I know, like within the sort of selection process, recruitment selection, like there's code tests, and they sort of scrutinize that, like around, I guess, the kind of the way they structure it. But then there's also, you know, we could come onto a project with a client and, you know, they've got to work with some sort of legacy code base there. And, you know, kind of some of them are good. A lot of them aren't. A lot of them are kind of rubbish. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see like how your application there would sort of deal with, you know, more of those sort of spaghetti type of sort of code bases and how far it goes. But I think, yeah, like it sounds like a really sort of interesting sort of angle and opportunity that you're working on there. So yeah, I'd be keen to kind of keen to follow that and see what.
Yeah, for sure. Please sign up
Share it
for
with
our mailing list if you're
like
interested.
the
It's at stenography.dev, and we'll be peeling people off of the waiting list and kind of dealing with that in the proper way. We're trying to make a really good tool, so we're really focused on making it work for a lot of different people's use cases and stuff like that too. So we're not like publicly opening. We're just like, oh, go to this website and hit go. But it's on its way to becoming that.
Yeah, nice, cool. Yeah, I'll jump on your list.
Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions? Baxter, Elijah?
Sorry, I just one like quick question. Long stretch of the focus work. Like I haven't read the book there, but what is that? Like, is that kind of 30 minutes? Is it 3 hours?
I think it varies from person to person, but the idea is that you want to enter the quote unquote flow state for long enough for something interesting to happen, right? So there's always like the idea of moving to the next kind of big milestone of your project, and you can kind of just feel it sometimes, you know what I mean? For some things it's super clear, some things are very fortunately clear cut in this world, and a lot of things aren't, you know, and the idea of deep work is very valuable for the things that aren't clear cut. So if I was just making a cake, there's a lot of clear cut steps along the way. It's like, okay, here's a pot filled with just eggs and flour. Okay, now it's all whisked together. Okay, now it's in the oven. Okay, now it's been 45 minutes. Okay, now it's done, right? So it's like you have very clear cut. There's not a lot of thinking involved. But then there's like things like, how do I build my dream house? Oh, that's a whole different question. What does my dream house look like? How many rooms does it have? How many bathrooms does it have? How high are the ceilings? You know, so there's a bunch of different things that need to be solved in these kind of more abstract kind of like, I want something, but I'm not exactly sure what I want. And that's where deep work is really valuable, because then you're basically able to say, look, I'm going to lock myself away for enough time to just move the ball forward. And that by the time that I end this session, whatever the session is, again, sometimes it is 30 minutes, but I usually find that it takes like 15 to 25 minutes to get into that state where you're actually being productive and moving towards single-mindedly towards one particular goal or project. And then usually you'll want to be in that state for like an hour or two. You know, the thing is, like, time is scarce. And that's why I kind of jabbed at social media and Twitter and stuff like that in the first place, is because we're always running out of time. You know, there's never a situation where you get back more time. So the goal isn't to make more time. It's just to use the one that use what you have left more effectively. And deep work is really, really good at that, because it's just basically at its root form, just single-minded. I'm just going to really just focus and give all that I am, which is just, again, just do your best, for lack of a better term, right, to this particular problem, and I will be moving it forward. So by the end of it, you know, the meta scale at the end of a human life, but at the day-to-day scale, which is much more reasonable and approachable, I will be able to go to bed knowing that I've done what I needed to do.
Yeah, nice. Thanks.
Great. Sorry, Bax, you had a question.
Yeah, great talk, Bram. I learned a lot. Certainly, Da Vinci is influence for me as well. And I also did just finish Deep Work, the book. Literally last week, I was reading it on my iPad. So that's awesome to see. I guess just while we're talking about it, like my Cliff's notes from the book, because it's so fresh in my head still, right, is he mentioned like there's two kinds of people who work, right? So like one style is you just like only do it and you tell everyone around you like I'm just going to be doing this for the next 2 weeks, I'm unavailable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you sort of just zero in and then you take a break after for like a while to recover. And then the other style is like you work consistently, right? Like 8 to 4, these are my times, and you do it every day, like even on holidays, right? There's a lot to pick out in that book, but I certainly relate more to that first category. Like I like to get my ideas out, strike while the iron is hot, and then I don't want to see that idea for like 2 weeks, right? And so I don't know, like so like I guess more like creatively speaking, like what style are you at, Brad? Like are you a mix of the two, or?
Yes, I would say that I'm a mix of the two, just mainly because like I have like a big spreadsheet where I keep all of my ideas. And I have been burned enough by my ideas in the past. I've noticed that like if you ideas need space so that you can finish them. If I usually have an idea and just immediately attack it, I noticed a lot more unfinished projects in my queue. But if I usually like write down an idea and then scroll further down my spreadsheet and choose an idea from a few weeks ago that was interesting, then I have a much better appreciation for the things that need to get done with it, right? Because usually when I just have an idea, I'm much more enamored by the idea of it than the work that actually needs to get done for it. So when you give it some space, I find, at least with my own working style, that I'm able to appreciate the problem more and be less kind of just in love with the passion of trying to get something. In terms of like the scheduling thing, I think it varies from person to person. I think the goal is to have a solid schedule because again, that is technically the most effective use of time, right? Like if you know that for these hours of the day that this is going to be spent doing whatever this thing is, there's no kind of like question. Basically, the idea is that left to our devices, we will always choose the easier route. And that's just a part of being human. That's a part of being an animal. Honestly, you know, animals by nature are intrinsically lazy because that's how we save energy. So the idea of making that commitment to yourself and others is kind of an affront to that, right? It's like saying like, no, I will be doing this and here's why. But the idea is that if you're not getting a lot of value out of saying, you know, 8 to 4 are my deep work hours, then yeah, of course it's worth dropping. I think finding what works for you is really important, but also being realistic and striking deadlines in such a way that you don't spend 5 months working on a project that goes nowhere. And another way that I could have labeled this whole talk is basically the idea of life being a series of projects. When you look at it, you know, there's some long-term projects that don't really end, like being a brother or being a son or being a parent. But there's a lot of short-term projects along the way in life. You know, you work at a job and you just joined that job and you're like, oh, this is going to be forever. But of course not. It's going to be 2 to 5 years, really. You know, right? The way that jobs work these days. Or you get really excited about technology and you're like, oh, this is going to be my life forever. It's like, no, it's more like going to be 6 months. So the idea of seasonality, the idea of really appreciating that things kind of come to a close gives you a realistic kind of deadline to work around. And I find that that's where also scheduling can be really helpful, is that you're like, look, I'm really only going to play guitar for 6 months. And if I hate it at the end of 6 months, then I'm just going to drop guitar. And that's going to be that, right? But the idea of saying like, now I can fully put my effort in knowing into the 6 months because I know that it ends. So I think knowing that a project ends is super important. And when I was, you know, before I started working on stenography really a lot more, when I was taking down pretty much like a project per week or a project every 2 weeks, it was because of that. I knew that, okay, I needed to get 80% of the project done in a week and a half. So what do I need to do to make that happen, right? And the sacrifices that I learned to make along the way were just really amazing. And the things that I thought that I needed but didn't actually need. So I would recommend just being willing to at the very least give yourself artificial deadlines for projects, even the ones that are a little bit more arbitrary. Like if you wanted to become a better cousin, you know, it's like in 2 months from now, I will have called my cousin 8 times on the phone, right? There's an arbitrary deadline. There's a thing that you need to do. And they don't always have to pick up, you know what I mean? But at least you tried.
Yeah, totally. That's awesome. Like I heard, like, especially to your first point about giving ideas breathing room, like I heard, especially in music, like producers, they sort of like to let beats simmer. Like they actually use that word, right? Like let's spend a few weeks where it's more like on the back burner, you know? But yeah, I generally agree with you. I think sometimes though, like the main thing is to move based on the opportunity, right? Like I think like not all ideas are equal, right? But for the most part, for the purposes of the practice, like you're right, like arbitrary deadlines, like these all can make your creative life healthier and happier. You know what
And
I
I
mean?
think that
Like
it's a scarcity idea where a lot of people are like, oh, I need to jump on this now. And if it's a really good opportunity, it'll be around in 2 weeks. That's why I'm not too worried about the crypto space. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, you got to make the money now. You got to do the things now. And I'm like, look, if the technology is actually worth my time, it'll be around 5 years from now. And if I have like ideas and things that are worth working on 5 years in the space, that's when I'll address it. Things don't really trend towards zero as much as people think that they do. It's not necessarily like the competitive space is in one that when somebody figures something out, they're going to get the whole pot. That is the case sometimes, but even then that doesn't end up being the case in the long term. So the idea is that you that ideas that have kind of been sitting for a while, again, are still probably opportunistically available, but you'll just have more data. So you'll basically be able to make a better decision that's less subjective and driven by emotion and driven by, I need to do this now, and more like, no, this is why this is good. And this is why this is bad.
right. Like it adds more space and objectivity because you're not blinded by pressure.
Exactly.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And just, I guess, final question from me. I don't want to hijack this whole conversation, so feel free to interrupt me at any time. You did mention imagination, and like this is something I've been thinking about as well. Like I'm drawn to GPT-3 just because of the cycle time, like just because you can come up with ideas and create a prototype relatively fast, at least the AI part, right? Like GPT-3 is so funny. Like I think I spend more of my time on the everything else other than the AI, right? The AI part can be validated pretty quickly. But I just, one thing I find interesting is I'm noticing different undertones in the community. Like I'd say maybe last summer was the heyday for demos, like use cases. And lately the energy that I'm getting is there's just these really compelling GPT-3 based startups. And I'm not bashing one in favor of the other. But I just like, the startups are really impressive. I have a video coming up on just like all these crazy things people are doing with it, and it's exciting. I just wonder though, like for the use cases and demos, like what other areas should we be exploring? Like at some pure research level, pure curiosity level, like sort of an idea I've been kicking around for a video series is like, apparently NASA does these like mission designs to go to Mars, you know? And so I was thinking, wow, wouldn't that be cool? Could GPT-3 design some kind of space mission, right? And all the resources and the cost and other stuff. Because I mean, I personally think there's just so much more that we haven't discovered yet, right? With GPT-3. Like, so I think it's part like we need to discover, but part is also we need to be more imaginative, right? In addition to capitalizing and commercializing. So anyways, like I just like I guess at a macro level for everything you talked about today, like what are your thoughts like on just like thinking bigger or getting inspiration from elsewhere?
Right. And I think that this is a tricky subject because, you know, again, it's kind of it's a built-in paradox, right? The idea is that you need to have a lot of parts on the table, as that one quote was saying, but then you need to know what to do with them. And the idea of knowing what to do with them is where the kind of like the epiphanies and the showers or on the long walks hit you, right? Like that's like, oh wow, I didn't think that thing could be that thing, but there it is. It's in my head. Now I guess I should write it down. So in terms of why there were so many demos that first couple months with GPT-3, I think as a person who was really involved in that space, I can say that it was exciting and new, and there was no wrong answers, right? So like we've kind of hit a point now where the paths have been well defined with GPT-3. People are a lot more familiar with the different engines and the temperatures and how to like kind of start their prompt engineering problems and stuff like that as well. And I can say, because again, with office hours, that not as many people as I would have hoped at this point, a year in, are as fluent with GPT-3 as I would have hoped that the community would be overall. But I think we're getting there for sure. So I think that the transition from demo scene to startup has basically happened because, you know, people have found a few really interesting deep dives that GPT-3 is really good at, and it's worth pursuing on kind of like a more philosophical kind of like can we solve this problem as a whole level, right? Whereas the early days of GPT-3 were just like, how can I get this tool to say something funny and post it on Twitter? That being said, I think again with the idea of curiosity and how I'm kind of wary of people getting it from other people, basically, for lack of a better term, is that it's really hard to separate out, am I doing this because I'm genuinely interested, or am I doing this because I saw somebody else doing it and I respect them? And I think that that's kind of dangerous, right? Like I think a lot of the times having the kind of mindset of play isn't about chasing what other people think is cool and inventive. It's doing something just genuinely because you were just you just wonder how it works. You know, you can be obsessed with birds today. We've like pretty much figured out how birds fly, but you can refigure that out. You know what I mean? If you just happen to really be interested in the flight of birds. So I think the idea is there is a lot of information out there. There's a lot of false flags. There's a lot of people who will signal things that they think are important and convince you that the thing that they think is important. And it might be, you know what I mean? This isn't like a give all like situation, but I would say more times than not that it's not valuable, right? At least for the projects that I've ended up making that I love, right? Like there's a number of projects that I made because I was kind of not coerced into it, but just kind of like, oh, this seems like a thing that people would appreciate. And then I've never really put my heart into those projects. I was never really there for it. I never really wanted to like bring them to their logical conclusion. They never really felt good for me or the people who ended up using them. But the ones that I genuinely was just like, wow, I would be really stoked if this existed in the world, even just as a demo. And now we're starting to see want to exist as a startup, right? With the GPT-3 space. And then just continuing to ride that feeling and showing up and doing the deep work as we've been kind of talking about, and balancing those two sides of the coin. And when you can know to use which one, know when to use which tool in your toolbox, you can just get so much farther. It's just so fun to be able to play both sides, and to be able to switch between the artist in your brain that just has these really wacky ideas and it's just constantly just stream of thoughting, which is what GPT-3 does in a lot of ways, right? But then raining that down and distilling it into its purest essence through the work and through the actual dedication to solving the thing that you're looking to solve is just a beautiful process. And I really hope that more people undertake it.
Yeah, I still think we're in very early days for GPT-3. Like it's been out there for a year, but realistically, the number of people who have heard of it, who've experimented with it, is a real fraction of who might be using it. I think it's really good that it's attracted a crowd who are far more creative and more focused on, some of the outcomes you can get out of it, other than simply as a programming tool. Because, frankly, you don't program GPT-3, you dance with it. And the better the dancer you get, the more it will unveil its own dancing, I think, for you. Are there any more questions from anyone? Bax, don't worry about dominating. If you've got a question or two, please shout them out.
Yeah, I just, like research is so interesting, right? Like there's primary research and then secondary research, and then you can say companies do their own forms of research and commercialize, right? But I do think there is benefit from just core primary use case discovery in the GPT-3 kind of space. Just because someone might discover something new, and that's cool. Like it might become a video, it might get some interest, something off Twitter, but I'm more excited for somebody to come after, right? And make something based on that, which is like a whole new kind of thing. Like I read this book, I can't remember the exact title, but it was like Why Greatness Isn't Planned. It was by some MIT professor on just novelty. And one of the points in the book was, it was just like, even just going 1 or 2 steps away from your first discovery, you're likely to land on something crazy, different, novel, important. And so anyways, like, like I think it's great. People should commercialize, but I wouldn't mind maybe like a 10-hour a week commitment from everyone, because we simply don't know all the things it can do, right?
Right.
And who knows, Bram, like maybe with your startup, not only with what it's doing, but you could be one feature away from something nobody ever imagined, right? That's also really valuable.
Right. And to your point, there is such a thing as the tangent possible. And that actually was one of the other books that I quoted from in this talk, was Where Good Ideas Come From by Stephen Johnson. And he basically gives numerous examples throughout history of people discovering the same thing at the same time. It's like calculus was discovered roughly, by this two separate people who had never met, 15 countries apart from each other, not 15 countries apart, 1,500 miles apart from each other. Light bulbs, music, so many things in history are just ripe for discovery, and timing is critical, of course. And I think this is kind of, again, when we were talking about the opportunistic thing, but I don't think it's ever, if it's only like a day-long fad anyway, it's not worth pursuing, right? It's the things that are going to stick around, the things that really profit from the Lindy effect, to quote Nassim Taleb, of just like the longer they're around, the longer they'll be around type situation. So you finding those deep questions and finding those things that are novel, but continue to have enough weight behind them to move the ball forward is kind of interesting. And I don't necessarily agree that I think that, I think a lot of these startups are having to think deeper about the problems that they're solving. You know what I mean? So in nature, they are going to have a deeper relationship with GPT-3 than, oh, look, I just found another cool thing that I could post on Twitter, right? And again, I don't think that either of these things need to be mutually exclusive, and you can do both, and you can switch between the two and be the person that you want to be, and solve the things that you want to solve for. But overall, I do think that, again, kind of to one of my previous points, the tool is really only as good as the vision and execution. So if you finding which one that you as an individual are bottlenecked by, or you as an organization are bottlenecked by, you'll see a bunch of old organizations not being able to have new vision, and then they just get completely run over by a small startup that had better vision than them. But you'll see a bunch of startups fail because they had a huge vision and no execution. So being able to really marry the two and really understand, okay, where am I suffering in these two? And then like leaning back into the artist or the practitioner when you need them, becomes a really good heuristic to figuring out, okay, this is how I get to the next game, the next move in this game of chess called life.
Definitely. And there is so much uniqueness to GPT-3 startups, right? Like the unit economics question of GPT-3 startups, like, can you make a profit? Like I've argued, like, chatbots, like I would not launch a GPT-3 chatbot company if you're only using GPT-3, because I don't think you'll be able to afford it, right? Also, like I had that huge like piece about monopoly, like building a monopoly with GPT-3 and all those things. And even at a tech level, like I'm giddy. I've been meaning to hit up Chris from Copy AI and just hear about like what does their stack look like? You know what I mean? Like how do they ensure quality and scale safely and all those other questions. But it is a different ball game, right? Like use case discovery and scaling out a GPT-3 startup are two different ball games, right? Yeah, it's just me personally. Not that I maybe one day I will start a startup, maybe with GPT-3, but I love just that early stage concept development, prototyping. That's just a joy for me. You know what I mean? But yeah, the scaling stuff is also really cool.
Well, stepping in as someone who has set up a startup with GPT-3, using it as our primary base for our tech stack, a lot of what we're finding is that, as we work more and more with our customers, we're discovering more and more use cases for either GPT-3 or what comes after it. Because GPT-3 is still early days, really, for natural language AI. Like, yes, it can write, a good amount of content already in quite a human way. but there is so much more potential to come, I think, in this realm. And you know, even the experimentation, the use cases, and things that are being uncovered now are only going to be built on as we move forward with more and more advanced natural language AIs. So I think in a lot of senses, we're really at the tip of the spear for natural language. It's now reached the point where it can decently write like a human for, you know, an article length or so. And from here, the possibilities just amplify. And the experiments that fail are going to be often the most interesting, because the question then becomes, what do we actually need to make those experiments succeed?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. You can learn a lot from failure.
Okay, cool. Well, we might wrap up today if there are no further questions. Thank you very much for coming along, Bram. This will also be recorded, and it's all been recorded and be put up on YouTube so people can review it later. I know there are some folks who didn't come along this morning who gave their apologies, who are going to listen to it later. A little bit of an awkward time for some people, being a Tuesday morning in Australia.
Sorry about the time zone.
Look, time zones. The important thing is we get the recording and we can share it, and all of this becomes part of the knowledge that, you know, presumably a future version of GPT-3 will absorb as video content, and then be able to again generate even better videos from in the future.
That's the hope. That's the hope. I'm actually a robot. The real Bram died months ago. I just uploaded myself into a USB flash drive. So
we're not far from that. All right, thanks very much for that, Bram, and for everyone who came along today. Do you have any final parting words, Bram?
I think, you know, just this is something that has been a really driving methodology for me over the past couple of years now, is the idea of becoming the artist practitioner. And this is a life lesson for me too. And, you know, there are days where I stumble and don't really pay attention to my artist or my practitioner and stuff like that. So I will say that it's a journey, you know what I mean? If there's a takeaway that I could offer for this call, is just to, you know, do the best that you can with what you have. And always be willing to push what you think is possible for you to do, and that usually gets you far enough, I found.
Great. Thank you very much, Bram, and thank you to everyone who can. And hopefully we'll see you next month for the next GPT-3 meetup. I'm not sure who will be speaking at that one as yet. I haven't actually organized a speaker for it yet, but I'll do that in the next couple of weeks and then have all the notices up in the meetup group. Thanks very much, Bram, and I'll see you all later.
Yeah,
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Bram.
Really appreciate
This is really
it.
inspiring.
Thank you, guys.